So again, we have Terra Shift here, engineering, agenda item 3.3C. Whenever you're ready, introduce yourself. Make sure your mic's turned on.
So, Mr. Chairman, you'd asked the question about
Yep.
why Terra Shift. Terra Shift had sent an email, I think you sent it out to a number of municipalities throughout Alberta,
I did.
with an opportunity for them to come and talk about the topic they're talking about, which is to do with the wetlands. And we've had presentations in the past, Alberta Wetland Policy. They're doing it basically at cost, just the cost to travel out here. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear from them. In the past, we've had Mustaskis do their presentations, Alyssa, and was there not another company we had come in a couple of years ago as well to talk about this? So equality, yeah. So we've had different other organizations. So basically, Terra Shift is doing this at no cost, aside from a little bit of reimbursement for travel and that. So,
Okay.
so that's how they came about.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So good afternoon, and welcome to Terra Shift Engineering's information session on the Alberta Wetland Policy, which just came into effect this year. My name is Janina Gloza, and this, no problem. And this is Paul Levier. We are both backgrounds in mine engineering and have a master's of science. I did my research in tailings research for the oil sands, and Paul's did his in geomechanics. Terra Shift Engineering is a consulting company based out of Edmonton that helps with sustainable development of natural resources, and currently we help gravel operators and peat harvesters. However, we are moving into also working with counties. So today's presentation will be going over the importance of wetlands, how to identify wetlands, and how the government is implementing to protect them, and how this will be impacting you. So Alberta wetlands have been slowly disappearing from Alberta. They have decreased from a third of the area down to 1/5. Their benefits include being natural carbon sinks. They improve water quality and help with flood risks. They also provide habitat for wildlife. So the most recent example that we have is last year we had blue algae blooms all across Alberta. These blue algae is harmful to humans and to wildlife, and their blue algae blooms have been linked to the removal of wetlands. So with wetlands in place, when a landowner or a farmer fertilizes their crops and lawns, these excess nutrients make their way into wetlands, and they will remove the excess nutrients. So they remove phosphorus and nitrogen from the water, and via their plants like cattails and bulrushes. However, once they're removed, all this excess nutrients end up in our lakes. So with extra nutrients, we have more plant growth, including the blue algae, and an increase in fish population. So at first we see benefits. However, this does reach a peak, because once the blue algae starts to spread, it creates a physical barrier between the atmosphere and the water, reducing the amount of sunlight and oxygen in the lake. And this reduction in oxygen then leads to plant decomposition, and more plants decomposing equals more oxygen use, and therefore the fish population starts to be impacted, which eventually will lead to an impact on the wildlife population. So what is a wetland? A wetland is an area that has been saturated for a long enough time to produce water-altered soils, and it also promotes the growth of water-loving plants. There are two main types. There are mineral wetlands, which include marshes, swamps, and shallow open waters. And we have organic wetlands, which include marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. It should also be noted that sloughs and muskegs, which are colloquial terms for wetlands, are also different types. So a slough is typically a marsh or a swamp, and then we have, oh sorry, it's the other way around. A slough is a marsh or a swamp, and then a muskeg is either a bog or a fen. So the main ways of differentiating between them is for a mineral wetland, it has at least, a mineral wetland has less than 40 centimeters of accumulated peat with a Vaughan Post ranking greater than 5. The water table is at the surface, or above it, and the water table does tend to shift. For organic wetlands, the accumulated peat is at least 40 centimeters, if not more, and has a Von Post ranking less than 5. The water table is well below the surface and has very stable. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, peat is an organic material used for horticulture. The industry standard for assessing peat is called the Von Post scale. And this is based on material colors, plant identifiable features, and water clarity. So if it has a Von Post scale rating of H1, this means it is undecomposed peat, or referred to as blonde peat. And if it has a Von Post scaling of H10, it is completely decomposed. So the problem with wetlands is that they're hard to identify. So we're walking through the woods and we see nothing but trees, and then all of a sudden we come across a pond. So we can probably all identify where the shallow open water is and where there's a marsh due to the vegetation, but what is in the open trees? We could have been walking, and for all we know, we were walking through a wetland. So in this case, depending on the soil, once we do a soil assessment and a vegetation assessment, we would see that there was an open fen, treed fen, and a bog, all of which are now protected by the Alberta policy. So the important thing to take from here is that not all wetlands look wet. So you can be walking through a wetland and have no idea. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures. Here we have a forest and 3 separate farmers' fields. So because this is a wetland presentation, you can probably guess that they were all wetlands. The ones that were probably easiest to tell were obviously the ones that had water in them. However, we did have an open fen, which are the hardest to spot, and you can see them when you have areas where there is no crop growth. And the reason crops don't grow in fens is because they're saturated with water due to the clay layer that's underneath them, because they're saturated at all times during the year. So then the other picture was a bog, and then we had a marsh and a swamp, which would probably be commonly known as just a slough, but it is protected and it is a wetland. So how does the provincial legislation work in with the Alberta Wetland Policy? So there are no changes to the legislations. The Alberta Wetland Policy is only meant to better aid the government on how they will be protecting wetlands and how wetlands will be assessed and the approval conditions once a wetland assessment is completed. The policy also does state that it applies to all sectors. So this is private and public and includes the energy sector, the natural resource development sector, farmers, and private landowners. So there are 3 main government legislations that enact the Water Act, the Wetland Policy. We have the Water Act, the Public Lands Act, and the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act, referred to as APEA. The Water Act is by far the one that will be enacting the wetland policy the most often due to its wide mandate. So as of January 2nd of this year, all Water Act policies will need to have a wetland assessment completed on them. The Public Lands Act, just a reminder, is that all titles, all bed and shores to any water body is public land. So what this can be interpreted as is if you have a cottage on the lake, that means you do not own the bed and shore of that lake. It is government property, and if you do decide to do any disturbance on this land, it does require government approval. So the same can be said for farmers' land. So if you have a wetland and you want to fill it in, you do not have jurisdiction on that wetland that is on your land. It is. What can they do if you do? They can issue fines. Yeah. How will they know? It could be reported. What does happen, so for example, for gravel operators, you can have directors or just like reviewers. They can come onto the site, and if they ask for your government approvals and you can't show it to them, then technically you're out of compliance and they can issue a fine. You do have the chance to properly get into compliance. They most likely will give you a couple months, but you do have to meet those requirements eventually. Yeah, it should be noted that the government hasn't been enforcing this very strictly, mostly due to their lack of manpower. But in recent years, it has been something that has been coming up more and more. We are getting landowners asking us for application assistance, so, which is why we thought it'd be a good idea to mention it. And finally, we have the APIA, which does require that we protect the air, land, and water, and this mostly applies on private land. So just to make sure I have a clear understanding for everyone, so these are the jurisdictions on Crown land. I know there's not a lot in this area, but I'll go through it anyways. So we have the APIA, which governs the entire area, the Water Act, which protects the water body, and the public land, which protects the bed and shore and anything upland. And now we have the Wetland Policy, which protects any wetlands. So that'll be anything from, I guess, the edge of the water body till 2 meters in depth, and then any wetlands upland. So for private land, if we have a similar scenario, the Water Act protects the water body, and the Wetland Policy protects the wetlands on that land. And then the Public Lands Act has jurisdiction over the bed and shore of that water body. And then any other regulations for private acts, they are then consulted for the other areas, for the other upstream areas. So the main goal of the Alberta Wetland Policy is to protect and conserve all wetlands. So first step would be to avoid. If you cannot avoid damaging the wetlands, then it's to minimize. If you cannot avoid minimization, then it's replacement. So as of January 2nd of this year, all Water Act policies will be requiring a wetland impact assessment, and some public land applications will also be requiring wetland assessments. For public land, as of July 4th of 2017, any approvals given by the government prior to that date are not subject to wetland replacement requirements, and any environmental impact and pre-disturbance assessments completed prior to that date are not required to be recompleted, and nor are they subject to the wetland replacement. In terms of private land, any wetland impact assessments completed in the growing season of 2015 can be submitted this year, June 1st, but any wetland assessments completed after May 31st of 2015 must follow the 2013 Alberta Wetland Policy. The Alberta government has released a couple tools which are available to the general public, and will be releasing their big tool, which is the Alberta Wetland Rapid Evaluation Tool for desktops. However, in the meantime, you can access the Alberta Wetland Rapid Evaluation Tool Guide and 2 GIS layers called the Emerged Wetland Inventory and the Estimated Wetland Value GIS layers. So the ABRAC guide provides guidance on how wetland assessments are supposed to be carried out and what are the requirements when submitting them. And then you can use the merged wetland inventory to know if you have any wetlands on your land. So for example, we have this area which is just east of where we are right now, or probably pretty close. And from a first glance, you might see that there's obviously at least 7 potential wetlands. But once you turn on the layer, you can see that there are several more. I know it might be a little hard to see, but there are at least 30 in there. So what this shows is, again, that wetlands don't necessarily look wet, but they are wetlands. So this this layer was created using remote sensing, and is therefore not necessarily always up to date. If there's a wetland that's on here and it's not currently visible or apparent, that could be due to changes in weather and lack of water. An open fen can become a marsh, and so be vice versa, depending on how wet that season is. So there are a couple ways of completing a wetland impact assessment. You can either complete a wetland impact form, known as a WAIF, and this is meant for low impact activities, or you can complete a wetland impact report, referred to as a WARE, which is meant for high impact activities. So a WAIF is a desktop method and can be completed year-round using the ABRAT D tool. However, since this tool is not yet available, all WAIFs must be completed using WARE guidelines. So the WARE is a field method and requires professionals to have them completed. It must follow the ABRAT A guide and must be completed during growing season. So types of low impact activities include exploration and monitoring or temporary developments. And some types of high impact activities include development, such as roads and permanent infrastructures. So let's say you're installing a road through a wetland. If you cannot avoid the wetland, then the government will ask if you can minimize your impact. So for example, you install your road and you install culverts along that road so that the flow can still continue between the two parts of the wetland. That would be a form of minimization. If the road is temporary and you reclaim the area back to the way it was after you're done using the road, this would be a form of reclamation. However, if you cannot minimize or reclaim your impact, then the only other option left is to replace. So the two programs that will be put in place is the in lieu payment and the permittee responsible replacement. The in lieu fee payment has not yet been properly defined by the government of Alberta, but is expected to be relatively high just due to wetlands being very important and being hard to recreate. So for the replacement program, the Alberta government has defined a standardized way of giving a wetland a value. Its method of evaluating is based off 5 main criteria: the biodiversity and ecological health of the wetland, the water quality of improvement of the wetland. So does it help with sedimentation? Does it help remove pollutants? Its ecological function, so does it help with flood mitigations in the area? Human use, is it used for recreation or education reduce? And relative abundance, so how common is it? For example, this area is known for its prairie potholes, and so these prairie potholes are very sensitive and rare forms of wetlands, so they would have a low relative abundance and therefore would be given a high wetland value. So with these 5 criteria, they're assigned a value of A, B, C, or D, A being high and D being low. So if we were to, with that road that we're installing, if we were to permanently impact 1 hectare of A value wetland, it would need to be replaced with either 8 hectares of D value wetland, 4 hectares of C value wetland, or 2 hectares of B value wetland. The government of Alberta will also be eventually rolling out their Alberta Wetland Bank. So what this is it gives the opportunity for example, private landowners to create wetlands, if possible, on their land, and then they would be given a credit of wetlands. So then if they were to, say, disturb wetland in the future, then they could use that credit to offset the destruction, or sorry, the removal of the other wetland. And they could also, if they were to construct wetland, they could also sell that credit to like gravel operators or peat harvesters. So there are a couple industries that will be impacted by this, a couple main ones. The first one is the peat harvesting industry. In 2017, the Alberta government released the peat application area. So what this is the areas where you can harvest peat, I guess, sorry. This has been limited to the northern part of Alberta and is far away from any large population growth, and they also removed any sensitive areas. So they removed caribou zones, key wildlife zones, and wetlands. So the second one will be farmers, obviously. And so a service that's available to them is ALICE, which is an acronym for Alternative Land Use Services. So what this program does is it takes private, corporate, government, and foundation funding and supplies it to different farmers and landowners as an incentive for them to cultivate and sustain the wetlands on their land. So what would happen is the county would register with Alice, and then Alice would come on sites and do a fee assessment on how much funding the farmer or rancher would be receiving. There are a couple of provinces that are currently registered across Canada. We have Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Prince Edward Island. We also have a couple communities that are already involved, including Lac St. Anne, Leduc, and Red Deer County. I guess the one closest to you would be Mountain View County. So as I mentioned, your guys' land use bylaws and municipal development plans do currently align with the Alberta Wetland Policy. You guys have labeled the wetlands as an environmentally significant area. Wheatland County is located in the natural grassland region, but is also located in the prairie pothole region. So these potholes are wetlands that are classified either as like shallow open water or marsh wetlands, depending on the vegetation. They are used by migratory birds and provide habitat to over 600 species of plants and animals, 50 of which are at risk. The amount of prairie potholes has been lost over the couple of years due to urbanization and farming. It's up to 40%, I think an average of 40%, and has been reduced in some areas down to 70%. So moving forward, Wheatland County has a couple resources available to them that the government of Alberta will be releasing. There's always, currently they have the FWIMS tool, and then the ABRAT-D desktop tool will soon be made available. However, if they are, these are several different sites, and if you're looking for something to help look at them all, then TerraShift does provide mapping services, which can include environmental information, provincial layers, and municipal layers. We did provide Alan with a demo of this, which is where he also got the presentation for today. Did you want to?
Well, I can bring it up if people want to look at it. Is that something people want to look at, or? Yeah.
Yeah.
No? Yeah, sure. Okay. Wheatland County currently have a service that provides mapping for them online or anything like that? Oh, okay. You might ask me who it is?
I think it's Menu Site.
Muni Sites?
Because I don't remember.
Oh, it's Muni Sites? Okay.
Muni Sites.
Yeah.
No, not sure what anyways.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Just in case.
Muni Sites? Oh, yeah, no, it takes a while to load, like similar to ArcGIS Online, like ArcMaps, but once it's loaded, it's quite quick and fairly simple to use.
Do you guys agree with that?
Well,
It's
it doesn't matter if we agree. I think it's more just, it's the way it is.
yeah, I might run there on Chrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really, I guess it's tough to pass judgment, I don't know. I guess it creates more work for the consultants, so it's hard for us to be mad about it. But I think as far as from a landowner perspective, I think that's an interesting thing that the government talks about, like, well, farmers had wetlands on their property for how many years, and then they understanding that, like, oh, I can use this land. However, I've been paying taxes on this land, but all of a sudden, oh, now my understanding's changed. I don't own this part of my land anymore. So when you log in, it loads up the login that Alan has. We'll bring up Wheatland County, centered on the map. You have layer tools over here, so you can toggle layers on and off just by clicking the checkbox that's just there. You can change your mapping, so if you just want to see a standard base map, road map, you can just do it under this map section. Yeah, I'll just show you how to bring that up. So you can, I'll just remove the Wheatland County overlay. So to add data, you just click on the Add Data tab. And we have our different layers that we have. And we can add any layers you guys want. This is not limited to just these layers, but we can do whatever we want. We customize it however. So right now we have the Alberta Merged Wetland Inventory. You simply click on it, and it gives you a little bit of a description of the data. To add it to the map, you just click Add to the map. Now this layer, because it's what's called a WMS layer, it requires to be at a certain zoom level. So if we go into the area that Janine looked at before, around Eagle Lake, you'll see that if I increase the opacity, which is done with a slider here, if I increase that, you can see how these areas are now showing up on the map. And if I bring up base map, you'll see it maybe a little more. Yeah. So if you want to, say, identify any of these features too, and you want to know, well, what kind of wetland is, if you can't tell by the legend here, you simply click on it, and it'll bring up in this feature identification tool what the classification is. So this one would be called a marsh. You can also add lots of other layers, like, for instance, we have the base water feature layer here too. You can add that if you want. Yeah, no, other municipal layers. If you have parcels, things like that, if you want to display it on the map. If you don't know how to use the map, we've got lots of help videos here. So you just click there and you can see how to do location searches, use the layer controls. It's all very intuitive though, so, but if you need to know how to do something, there's lots of documentation on how to use the tool. We've also provided a link to the Alberta Wetland Policy information session we presented today. So you just click on that, it'll bring up a PDF version of the presentation. Yeah, and there's other things too. If, for instance, it's quite a powerful tool. You can even go into 3D mode, and you can look at things in a three-dimensional sense. So if you just hold down Control and drag, you can go into. Got a little ambitious. I have to go back. Might be because it's presenting it, so it has to render everything. But yeah, you can do different things if you want. So yeah, that's basically a little brief demo of what the mapping system is that we have. So if you guys have any questions about that service, we can answer those questions. But I'm just going to hand it back to Janine, who will finish off the presentation.
So I guess if that was basically the end, and if anyone had any questions, I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Oh, there you go. So now if you have any questions about the Alberta Wetland Policy, I'm free to take them.
Okay, thanks. Anyone? I just had a question about maps of wetlands, but you already showed that it's on there. So that's provincial information?
Yeah,
All that, the maps and everything?
It's on ours.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Anybody else have any questions, Tom?
Okay.
All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Need a motion to accept that as information? Tom makes that motion.
I move that we accept Terra Shift's presentation as information.
Thank you. All in favor? Passed. So it's 2:30. Our next presentation is not till 3, or is there somebody? Okay. Do you want to keep going, guys? C, this Rocky Mountain GTL Inc. Expander Energy Agenda Item 3.3D, presenting a little bit early. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having us. That one? Okay.
You need me to do something special here?
No. There we go. Sometimes it just takes a moment.
Okay.
Probably okay without the sun coming through now.
I'm good. So just a little bit of an introduction and explanation. I think the last time you saw one of the presentations, it was an Expander Energy and Rocky Mountain GTL presentation. Expander Energy raised the funds for this plant through a subsidiary that it had, Rocky Mountain, and the subsidiary is actually going to ultimately be the operator of this plant, and it will be known as the Rocky Mountain GTL Carsland plant. So that's, if you see some discrepancies between what was presented earlier and what I'm going through here today, it's simply the progression of the financing dictating what plant and what name we're going to be using. So just to remind you, I think, Rocky Mountain has been involved in the GTL industry essentially now for almost 10 years. And we have been looking at the synthetic fuel as you see on the slide here. It's probably being considered the engineered synthetic fuel, and we're using that as a bridge to the future. We know that the fossil fuel industry is going to be under pressure as we move through this century, but one of the things that we are still going to be requiring is whether it's fossil or a liquid fuel to get us through this time period between where we can get into fully renewables. And so we're looking at the sample that I showed you here as being the bridge to the energy future on the fuel side of things. Rocky designs, constructs, operates small-scale gas to liquid, and that's in comparison to Shell or Sasol, where they manufacture the GTL fuels at a size of 50 or 60,000 barrels a day, all the way up to 140,000 barrels a day. This plant that we're talking about today is about a 500 barrel a day unit, and we see the ability to use these almost, call it at street corners if you like, but it certainly doesn't require the massive infrastructure that the Sasol or the Shell type will use. This fits more the Canadian economy and the Western Canada gas infrastructure, where one of these units can go several to a county for that matter. We're looking at the quality of the fuel being, and we called it here the well to wheel. It has the lowest greenhouse emissions of any diesel fuel that you can buy today. And so it is a major step into the future to get us through that bridge period until somebody comes up with some other form of transportation power. And we see that it has a major impact, or can have a major impact on fuel for roads, rail, marine, and eventually aviation products. I'll skip mostly through this. It does provide, and as I touched on a little bit earlier, an alternative for small scale, and they can go into almost any place in the Canadian gas industry. So even some of the older fields that are out there, we can move one of these plants and take that natural gas and turn it into this type of diesel fuel. I probably don't have to go through much of this one. Basically, Canadian natural gas is stranded. We can't get pipelines to the west coast for liquefaction in liquid natural gas. We can't compete, generally speaking, with the US, where they're producing gas down in the Ontario and south areas. And in fact, if you look at the slides, they've actually stolen about 3 BCF a day from our traditional markets. And what's happening on that one then is that we're ending up with a buildup of natural gas in Western Canada. And you can see that on the slides shown here, we don't have a mouse showing. Was there a pointer, Alan? Okay, that'll work. So you can see that the effect of that is that we're looking at natural gas prices effectively below $2 right now. and that the market a year ago was, 2 years ago was this slide here. We started to fall down lower over this period of time, and this year's forecast, this is the price forecast going forward. You can see that they're substantially below a $2 number. That is unfortunate for the gas producers, but it really fits our economics very well, and we can actually offer an alternative for them to produce diesel as opposed to trying to go into the traditional sales of putting it into a pipeline and looking for an export market. One of the things we had talked a little bit about the quality of the fuel. If you look at a comparison between the syn diesel, the current Canadian diesel specifications, and the Euro 5 standard, Rockies diesel is a 70 cetane or greater than 70. That's roughly equivalent to the octane in a car. The higher the cetane number, the better the fuel burns and the more power you have through the better complete combustion. Zero sulfur, you can see the Canadian is about 15 parts per million. Zero sulfur means no sulfur dioxides, no SOXs in the atmosphere in the area around town, and that's one of the precursors to smog. So might not be a problem here, but certainly in big cities that has been an issue. The aromatics part on this one, this is the part that you have high aromatics, that'll give the opportunity to roll coal. More aromatics means more smoke, more particulates, and less combustion. So with a zero aromatics or very low compared to what you can buy out of Fort McMurray or out of the tanks right now, you'll be actually rolling clear in this case. And lastly, the carbon intensity. That's becoming the new measure of the efficiency of fuels and the environmental side of that. Our numbers right now look like they're about 85.3 compared to the current Canadian 95 and Euro standard of 91. The low carbon fuel standard that California and BC, Oregon, and I believe Quebec are looking at rolling in 2020 is this 86.27. We meet that standard already. Nobody else here does even come close. So that's what we'll be building here in this county. A couple of things on there we touched a little bit. The higher quality cetane improves engine performance and you get a better burn. The simple fact that it contains zero or very low aromatics really does reduce the unburned hydrocarbons, the microparticulates that come out, and has been probably the part about the diesel fuel in Europe that's been getting the most press lately. These are significantly reduced. It actually really improves the quality of the diesel if you blend it with standard petroleum diesel. There was just a study done in Beijing with a company out of North America that we're actually using their catalyst that studied the effects of a 20% blend of synthetic diesel with standard petroleum diesel, and there was a marked decrease in the amount of pollutants that were released in their study. That's available on the net if anybody is interested. And in fact, the nice thing about this is that there's no difference required in fuel infrastructure. This fits into all of the standard diesel fuel parts of the chain, and in fact, you could drive up to the plant and fill up the truck right out of the shipping tank. One of the things that actually sets Rocky Mountain apart from most of the other GTL producers is that we have the ability to take the raw natural gas from the field, which will include some of the natural gas liquids. There'd be some ethane and some propane and maybe some butanes. And we don't have to separate those out. The Shell, the Sasol, some of the others that are in the news all have to work with essentially pipeline gas. We don't, and that's actually one of the patents that we've developed over the years. That allows us to put the plant right where the gas is being produced. So the other things that fit into this thing is that it's a modular basis. So we'll be building the modules in Calgary. They'll be coming out on truck, and we'll basically just back them up, put them on piles, and our construction time is significantly reduced. We had talked a little bit about being online sometime around the end of the year. Our modules are expected to be mostly finished in and around August. So by the time we actually get them out to the field, we only have a field construction time of a few months. The economic benefits on this one, well, if we're looking at, and this is from the eyes of the producer for this matter, if they're normally getting about $2.50 at their export price, I've done a calculation with regards to barrels of oil equivalent. If you converted that into that BOE, that's about $31. We're currently selling, actually, we're currently selling diesel at, I think, about $125 a barrel. And so if you actually did that straight conversion, you'd be selling your gas at about $12 an MCF, which is a substantial increase over the $2.50 that the poor producers are getting right now. Now I'll jump right into the GTL plant here. A quick summary, it's about 500 barrels a day of synthetic fuel. The feedstock is basically right off of the Manitowoc gathering system. We're using their compressor to give us the compression that we need, but they're not doing any processing on the gas. So we're taking the raw gas after compression and making the diesel from that. We're looking at about, on this particular design, roughly a 20% internal rate of return for the plant. I'm not sure whether you know exactly where this one is. Everybody nodding their head. Anyway, this is for the I guess the unknowns or the ones that don't know, so we give a little bit of a map on that. But you can see we're going right in beside the Manitowoc plant, so we can actually take advantage of the close proximity, and we don't have to put any other pipelines in.
Where would your access to the road be?
Let me back up one. It's actually coming off the north-south road as you swing around the corner from the Manitowoc plant before you get to the railway. So this is a flyover of the plant. This is not an artist's conception. This is actually built up from our engineering design. So with a viewer, you can actually drill into the details of each one of those modules, and actually you can get down, take a look at the valves that are being put in. So this is actually the summary of that, and this is actually what the plant is going to look like. This was not just the concept. There's a couple of key points or key elements to the plant. I'll stop right there. So the two critical ones, this one here is called the steam methane reformer. It's the biggest unit that'll be out in the field. And that's where we take the natural gas, we heat it up, and that causes the molecules to break apart and create a syngas or synthetic gas. So we take, for the chemistry here amongst us, we take the CH4 that comes from the field, and we break it into CO and hydrogen. So those are the two components that we worry about most. That goes through a little bit of processing down in here and some compression, and then it goes into these four big towers here, and those are they're called Fischer-Tropsch reactors. That's basically where we take those same carbon monoxide and hydrogen molecules and we knit them back together again, and they form a long chain. That chain becomes diesel. If you kept on going, you'd end up with a wax, so it'd be a paraffin wax. But we have a catalyst that stops the reaction at the diesel side of that, so it's a much more efficient reaction. We've got some shipping tanks here. We have 4 diesel tanks, some water tanks, and some off-spec capabilities in case we do have an issue. We have a naphtha tank, and we can actually take gas liquids from, or propane or whatever it is. If there's a very bad market for gas liquids, we can actually produce those through the plant as well and turn those into diesel. This was a bit of a breakdown. I'm not sure we need to go through that. It's sort of the component part of that. You saw the syngas generator, the steam methane. It goes through a cleanup into those big towers and then out into the tanks. So it's just sort of the major components that you can see there. We have a couple of patented technologies that we're putting out there, and we're also licensing one from Grey Rock, which is everything put together in combination makes for this efficient plant. Sort of in schematic again, we take the raw gas from the field and it goes towards the Manitowoc gas plant. So from a producer's perspective, they can take the plant products and they can sell the gas, the methane, down into the sales line, or they can actually send it to the GTL plant. The same thing with their ethane or the other components of that, and it goes into the GTL plant and we make diesel or jet fuel out of that. If they have a market, they can ship it to a traditional market, and they have the flexibility then to maximize their revenue by again, monitoring the price that they would get trucking it out of there versus giving it to us or selling it to us to produce diesel fuel. That breakover is about $10 a barrel. If they can get more than 10, they should sell it directly. If the market is less than 10, they should sell it to us for BTUs and we'll turn it into diesel. So we're a little bit of a status here. So we're fully engineered. All of the components have now been bid. We have accepted all of the bids. One's still coming in. I shouldn't say all, but it's we have a budget price on it, and it's not the critical piece. We have the AER permits. We've acquired the land. We've got the gas supply, and the diesel has been contracted as well. Most of the plant is going to be constructed in Calgary or the region. The compressors will be fabricated in Stettler and then trucked down, but everything else is pretty much in this corridor. Again, we're looking sort of for plant startup somewhere around December of 2018. You can see I slipped up on that one and said we were going to be in the field in November, but we didn't quite get there this time. And again, we're looking at 450 barrels a day, roughly 450 to 500, and we're using about 3.5 million of the rich gas. The interesting thing about this plant, zero H2S, we are using 100% of the water that we make in a recycle, so we don't need outside water and we don't have water to get rid of. So we are self-contained on that. We also have a heat recovery on this plant that most other units don't have. We have the capability of making roughly 1 megawatt to about 1.3 megawatts. Our internal consumption is about the same as that. So we are almost self-sufficient on power. We have left capabilities for CO2 recovery and recycle. One of the things that will be added to the plant in another year or so is a CO2 module. We will capture the CO2, recycle that to the front of the plant and convert, I think, about 40% of that CO2 back into diesel fuel. We'll take the carbon from that and make diesel fuel out of it. Well, here's where I'm prognosticating a bit, I think. If you look at what some of the revenue streams from the plant will look like from an Alberta perspective, we'll be using about $4.5 million of gas sales, depending on pricing of that one, of course. That will generate about another almost $1 million in royalties to the government. If you take the fuel tax, and this was before the latest bump of the carbon tax, I guess I should say, that'll work out to about $2 million a year for taxes to the Treasury. And I'm making a guess at this one here, but using your mill rate, that adds about $250,000 a year to the tax account of the county. You know, roughly $8 to $10 million a year in spin-off taxes, or $160 million over the 20-year life. And then the last slide I wanted to sort of touch on was, I call it a government mandate, but it was interesting because in a number of the speeches that have been given this year out of the provincial legislature, they were looking to develop technologies which increase the value of the resource. So how do you process gas or propane or whatever? We can do that. How do you improve the environmental performance of our fuels or of our resources? Well, if you increase the quality of the fuel and you make it the most environmentally friendly fuel that you can buy in the province, I think we've done that. And are we reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Yes, we are. We have the lowest carbon index diesel fuel of any fuel you can buy in the province. And that is my point. So that's a couple of the folks that you've seen, most of them here. Happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Go ahead, you had questions.
What is, if you're buying your, or you're getting your natural gas 250 a cubic meter, what is the diesel fuel going out to the market for? What are you selling that for?
We have to compete in the diesel market. We have not tried to look for government grants or anything like that that would change or would be a supplement to that. So our diesel is being sold at rack price. Our agreement on this one is Calgary rack. So that's whatever the market is at that particular time. Today, I think rack price is 82 cents a liter. 83 cents a liter, something like that.
On there, yeah, base.
So that's before, we sell before taxes and before markup, and we don't have a refinery margin. So we basically compete at the lowest price in the province of the day.
So the Manitowoc plant is where you've got, how many similar plants, say, in the area could you put one of these plants at?
This plant requires roughly 3.5 million cubic feet of rich gas. Anybody that would have that kind of a volume, probably for a period of 10 years, would fit nicely into it. Or there's a couple of other things that we would look at that become critical into the sort of the decision-making process of where to locate. We picked Manitowoc for a number of reasons. We're relatively close to Calgary, so if we're using this as a showcase, we can fly, or somebody can fly in to look at the plant, be out here in an hour, tour the plant, and be back on a plane if it's critical to them in a single day. Otherwise, it's still a very easy showcase. Manitowoc had more gas than the plant could handle, than their existing plant could handle. So again, it was a nice fit for us. We could put ours in there and take some of their surplus. There was also a solution gas or a sales gas line from their plant that tied in through ATCO back to the main TransCanada transmission line. And if something happened to Manitowoc, if the reserves weren't there, we have the ability to buy gas from anybody in the province and deliver it to our site. And so we don't have a problem of ever running out of feedstock. And those are sort of the critical parts of what we were looking for. So if somebody else had a plant about that same size, theoretically it would fit.
Is there, when you're processing the gas there, is there any other chemicals that you use to process, or is it just all within?
No, actually, we have a couple of catalysts, but they don't degrade. We have a heat medium on site, which is basically a diatherm kind of medium. Other than that, we don't need anything to process. And it's a fully enclosed process. So the gas comes in, it gets converted into a syngas. And then that's still all contained in the plant. And it's, when you make the diesel out of it again, that's fully contained. The only time you see exits from the plant, if you like, is our diesel. We make some naphtha as well, and we make some water. The water we recycle so that it basically stays in a loop in the plant. We have one big furnace, the two big cans that you saw on the site there, the steam methane reformers. That's a high efficiency furnace is really what it is. In fact, we've created a new design on that we actually capture the water that's going up in vapor form from the combustion, and we're capturing that water and recycling it as well. So the only thing that's going out is the same thing that comes out of your high efficiency furnace at home. That's the only emissions we have.
Oh, I'm very impressed. Hope it works.
Okay, I've got a test here I'm going to pass out to see if you were paying attention. Okay. And anyway, thanks for your time. I appreciate the opportunity. Alan, thanks again.
Take a break till Strathmore shows up. Yeah, they should be. Okay, take a break for 15. Okay, we'll get started again, and we are on our 4 o'clock appointment, agenda item 3.3E with Town of Strathmore. And we'll do some introductions. Do you want
Jason Wilson.
Jason Wilson. Scott Klassen.
Tom Aker?
Rob Roycroft, I'm the town's project manager for the field house.
Okay.
So is this thing ready to go?
Gotcha.
They were working really hard through the Christmas break. All of the major consulting team, as well as the contractors, have a financial incentive to finish as early as possible. It's one of those sort of tricks of the new kind of contractual arrangements we're entering into these days. So they are motivated to try and finish the project as quickly as they can. They're also motivated to seek areas of reducing costs because they too share in some of those reductions. The target date for completion remains the end of August, and it is the school's intent to move in over the August-September long weekend and start the first week of school in the new facility. You know, we might lag behind a couple of days or something like that, or a couple of weeks. We don't have that same kind of deadline that they've got 500 or so kids that they've got to house someplace. Nevertheless, the town itself is taking other steps to become ready. Have recently hired a recreation manager. And we're getting in place all of the building blocks to start to be able to deliver programs from that facility as well. So all of that sort of stuff is going along. There haven't been any dramatic, unexpected surprises with respect to the construction, although from the very beginning, and I wasn't associated with it at that point in time, so some of you may in fact know more about those early days than even I do. But the opportunity came together, as I understand it, fairly quickly, and it seemed that the stars and the planets were lined up to make something happen, and quick action was taken. Initial sort of ideas of some of the things that it was going to cost. It was recognized at the beginning that some elements, enhanced elements, were removed from the project at that time to get the thing going, with an expectation that the town would seek additional funding sources to take care of those other elements that we wanted to include from the beginning. It's also, if you've ever done a project with a school organization, they are so incredibly limited by provincial regulation in terms of what they can and cannot do. It's all written down in very, very strict regulations that they can't exceed. So some of the elements, for example, that were added to the project were things like air conditioning, which are obviously going to be an essential part of comfort and user convenience to extend the use of the facility to a 12-month operation. As I understand it, school facilities aren't allowed to have air conditioning in their gymnasiums. So these are some of the crazy ways some of these things have to come together. You do what you have to do to make a project work, and we did that, and it's well underway. One of the primary sources of additional funding that we've been working on, and the county had been involved early on in it, although we've taken a different tact in the last few months, is what we're referring to as the sponsorship and naming component. And I'll turn it now over to Sharon McCormick, who's going to give you an overview of that program.
Hi. As Rob was mentioning, I'm leading the sponsorship campaign for the town and the region in this particular facility. Our objectives in undertaking a sponsorship campaign have mainly been twofold. One is it provides another revenue stream, so to speak, that allows us to build in some enhancements to the facility at a time in which the facility is currently under construction, so a time that we would rightfully and most of the time assume correctly would be most cost effective to do that. And secondly, it also provides revenue for future capital. In other words, to go into capital reserve funds and look after some of the life cycle maintenance and further upgrades as a user needs evolve over time. So sponsorship is not necessarily something that we would just do at the beginning. It would be a campaign that we initiate and then turn into a program to run the lifetime of the facility. So it's quite an exciting opportunity, and we've made some great inroads in terms of the sponsorship. What am I pressing? Oh, wrong button, wrong way, sorry. So I just have on this slide some of the major steps just to briefly touch on. So once the decisions were made to go ahead and design and build the regional recreation facility, work was undertaken last July to identify components of the facility that would be appropriate for naming rights, sponsorship, and to not only identify those, but also to assign values. So the value of those assets has also been undertaken. Up until about October this year, about half of the total value of those assets have actually been secured in terms of sponsorship, which is a great milestone in a very short period of time. The most notable one, of course, is the title sponsor of the facility. So Strathmore Motor Products is the title sponsor. And we have 3 other sponsorship contracts that are in varying degrees of being signed off. So I can't release those names today, but they are close to being done, and just the nitpicking between lawyers is being undertaken. So it was a great time for the town then to turn to doing the rest of the sponsorship work internally as opposed to having an external consultant do it. So I started in about October, November, and to that date have continued in terms of identifying a canvas of businesses, both regionally, locally, private businesses, and some quasi-government organizations that may be quality sponsors for the sponsorship campaign. And so we've been working through that. One of the current things that we are working on is a cultivation event, so a sponsorship event that is actually happening on Wednesday evening. And I know the Reeve and, pardon me? Thursday. What did I say? Did I say Thursday? Okay, good. The Reeve and Alan are attending, and we're super excited about that. We have 10 businesses so far that have RSVP'd my time to travel here. Some of those are some of the suppliers that the County of Wheatland here does business with, so we're excited to bring those on board and find out a little bit more about those organizations and the fit that they might have. We're ecstatic that they want to be involved in the community and feel that this is an opportunity for them to hear more about the project and also more about the benefits that sponsorship can have, not only in terms of marketing and branding their business, but being able to invest in the community in this way. And of course, those types of contacts are absolutely critical for any sponsorship campaign. That will be my leaving ask for this council is, to provide us with support, help gain some profile for the sponsorship campaign as you're, conducting your regular meetings with business owners and prominent families and around in this area. Those are all important contacts and can help us kind of leverage those opportunities and further build on those relationships to value the community at a later time. Once we have the naming rights completed, and so the naming rights are each of the playing surfaces in the project has a naming right opportunity assigned to it, in addition to the walking track. There are 4 change rooms, there are 5 shower rooms and water filling stations that are available for naming rights, as well as 3 scoreboards in the facility. So like I said, we've got about half of them already sold, and so we're looking to complete the other half. We have also identified, just to kind of keep us focused, an order of magnitude in terms of what the pie for fundraising looks like. So it's not just about sponsorship. Sponsorship is certainly where we are focused at the moment, and it's important that we sell all of those naming rights opportunities prior to moving on to other avenues for fundraising. But those other avenues would be opportunities for other community members other than businesses to become engaged. So more in terms of community investment opportunities, opportunities for families to get involved if they want to leave a legacy within the community, service organizations, partner groups, those types of things. So when we complete the naming rights sponsorship part, we will then shift into more community event type thing and use that as a strategy and a tactic for furthering our fundraising. So you can see an order of magnitude of what we would expect to raise in total from both the sponsorship and the community part of it. And then once the facility is up and running, then the town can further continue its fundraising efforts by way of advertising. So by advertising, I'm talking about generally things that are less than $10,000. So they might have a shorter term than a sponsorship. So for sponsorships, we're looking at 5, 10, 15-year terms for that. That would be the basis of the contract. And for advertising, it might be just 1 or 2 years. And so our ask for this council is, like I said, to lend us your support in terms of making some contacts within the county and within the region at large with some businesses or with some prominent families. There are lots of families and landowners here in this area that have been here for generations that may see this as an opportunity to align the brand of their family name with the community itself and leave something for the betterment of those that are going to be using the facility. So all of you are welcome to attend the sponsorship event on Thursday evening. And if you do have other contacts that you wish to pass on, Alan has my contact information. You can certainly get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to follow up with any of those, whatever that might look like for you, if it's just passing on names and contact information, or if it's having a meeting with you and that particular person or organization. I'm happy to do that as well. That completes our presentation, so both Rob and I are available for questions.
Yeah, we understand that you're making arrangements for a tour. Okay.
We have a fairly,
Right.
cancel that for now, but
At some point, I'm
in
sure you will.
February likely.
Yeah. And at that point in time, you'll be able to get a much better firsthand view in terms of the actual construction. The roof is done. HVAC systems will be well underway by then. So you'll be able to see the physical reality. Right now we see the outside and that's about it, but inside all of the bits and pieces are starting to come together. But we wanted to talk to you particularly about the sponsorship, an opportunity, because we're continuing and to celebrate the success of a really interesting party project. Any questions? We're here to help out.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions for anybody?
Just,
Mike?
Yeah, not familiar, wasn't here at the start. I was just curious, what is the argument of joining both the school and the rec facility?
Well, Alan probably has a better background than I have, but the opportunity came along for the school to make a capital contribution towards a facility that would be used by more than the school. So it was started as the gymnasium component for the school, and given an opportunity to enlarge on that and expand it, the town and the county came along as additional financial contributors. The three-party partnership then enabled a much more significant regional recreation facility. Wouldn't have been developed, the indoor soccer pitches, the futsal fields, that sort of stuff, the indoor walking track, none of that would have been there in the gymnasium. So by coming together, the three partners able to much greatly expand the opportunity, the facility, and the programs that will be able to be offered. That's why the people jumped at it at the time. Very, very unique opportunity. And fortunately, sum up.
Well, Alan, what's our current funding that we've provided to this?
So council made a commitment last year, $3 million to the capital.
Okay.
And that was funded through MSI grants.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, $2.5 million was through MSI grants, and $500,000 was through the federal gas tax grant. And then we've made a commitment, which I think we budgeted $75,000 a year. Obviously, 2018, the facility won't be operational for only part of the year. So we've made a commitment to the financial loss on the facility based on a 30% contribution. So if a facility loses $100,000, then there'd be a $30,000 contribution from the county. But we've budgeted $75,000 for the next 3 years.
Okay. Capital side, the town's contribution was $5 million. The And the benefits for the school, for instance, they get to use the facility and the region gets to use access to something much larger than we've been able to have access to.
So there's a formal agreement in place, three-party agreement, that's open for review on an annual basis. I think first year it was on 18 months actually, so we wanted to get through an operational season to review that agreement. And it firmly lays out what responsibilities each party has, and it also lays out what access each party has to the facility. So like Rob said, after 3:30, 4 o'clock, the community has access to pretty much all the facility unless it's pre-booked for a tournament or something like that on certain fields. During the day, the gymnasium is totally accessible for the school, but they can also access the other components of the field if it's not being used by the community. So it's kind of the best of both worlds in that regard, from that perspective, for that type of facility. This facility with the indoor field house, it's got one basically indoor soccer pitch. It is the only facility from here to Calgary. There's not one in Chestermere that I'm aware of. Airdrie has 2 of them that were built about 7 or 8 years ago. So that's going to draw people as well. The numbers would indicate, I think in Strathmore, the numbers were around 400 or 500. There is potential that other communities would come there for tournaments and things like that. So it is a fairly good draw for the community as well. So there's that component in that. So.
Alan, we just received today latest and final architectural renderings of the facility. I'll send you a copy of those so you've got them. Okay, okay.
We've got hard copies on the walls. Citizens come in, they could actually.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your contributions, and get
Absolutely.
ready for a bang-up start in early September.
Awesome, thank you. Make a motion to accept as information.
I make a motion to accept the information.
All in favor? Carried. Make a motion to recess the meeting. Adjourn the meeting. Adjourn.
Sorry,
Yeah,
unless you really want to. Sorry.
no, that's okay. Make a motion to adjourn, Chase.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you.